Story number 1. The Living Snowman. I still remember that first snowfall of December like it was yesterday, despite the years that have since blurred into memory. Our small town of Ravenswood was transformed overnight into a pristine winter wonderland, each snowflake adding to the quiet beauty that blanketed the landscape. It was the perfect time for a group of friends to embark on our annual tradition, building the grandest snowman the neighborhood had ever seen. My friends Jake, Emily, Sarah, and I had spent the entire day outside, shaping and molding the snow into a towering figure. We added every detail imaginable: a carrot nose, coal eyes, a scarf knitted by Emily's grandmother, and a hat that Jake had found in his attic. As the sun set, casting a golden glow over our creation, we stepped back to admire our handiwork. The snowman stood tall and proud in my front yard, a symbol of our camaraderie and the simple joys of winter. As night fell, the temperature dropped, and the wind began to howl through the barren trees. We retreated inside, the warmth of our homes offering a stark contrast to the cold that enveloped the town. I went to bed with a sense of satisfaction, knowing that next year, we would surpass even this magnificent creation. But that night, something felt different, unsettling even. Around midnight, a soft rustling sound echoed from outside my window. At first, I dismissed it as the wind playing tricks on my ears. But the noise persisted, growing louder and more deliberate. Curiosity piqued. I approached the window and peered out into the darkness. There it was, the snowman. But something was wrong. It stood closer to the front door than before, his coal eyes seeming to follow my every movement. My heart raced as I watched, frozen with fear and disbelief. The snowman hadn't just been relocated by some prankster. It appeared to have a presence of its own, an eerie, lifelike quality that sent chills down my spine. I stumbled back, trying to rationalize what I was seeing. "It's just my imagination," I muttered, shaking my head. But the image of those coal eyes staring intently at me refused to fade. Couldn't sleep that night, the unsettling feeling gnawing at me like a persistent shadow. The next morning, the snow had settled into a thick, undisturbed blanket, hiding any traces of last night's disturbances. I woke to find the snowman gone. Panic surged through me as I rushed outside, the cold biting at my skin. In its place, large footprints were etched into the snow, leading away from where the snowman had stood and disappearing into the dense forest that bordered our town. My friends and I gathered in the living room, the footprints sparking a mix of fear and disbelief. "Did anyone else see it?" I asked, my voice trembling. Jake nodded, his usually confident demeanor faltering. "Yeah, I saw it move too. It was like it was watching us." Emily, always the skeptic, shook her head. "There's no explanation. Maybe some animal or someone messing around. We should tell someone about this." But there was no one to tell. Ravenswood was a tight-knit community. But during the storm, everyone was holed up in their homes, dealing with the aftermath of the night's fury. We decided to leave the matter alone, hoping that whatever had happened was just a bizarre coincidence. Days turned into weeks, and the memory of the moving snowman began to fade, replaced by the usual routines of winter. That is, until another December night brought with it the return of the eerie phenomenon. Once again, the storm raged outside, the wind howling like a restless spirit. Around midnight, the same rustling sound pierced the silence, drawing my attention to the window once more. There it was, the snowman. This time, it stood even closer to the front door, its coal eyes gleaming ominously in the moonlight. But what truly chilled me was the movement. The snowman's arms slowly began to sway, as if beckoning me to come closer. My heart pounded in my chest, a mix of fear and an inexplicable compulsion pulling me towards it. Gathering every ounce of courage, I grabbed my coat and stepped outside, the cold air stinging my face. The footprints were back, leading directly to the edge of the forest. But this time, they seemed to merge with something else, a pattern that resembled handprints etched into the snow, almost as if someone had tried to communicate, as I followed the footprints into the forest. The singing of the wind was replaced by a haunting melody, a sorrowful tune that seemed to emanate from the very heart of the woods. The trees loomed overhead, their branches twisted like skeletal fingers reaching out to ensnare me. The path was barely visible beneath the thick snow, but I pressed on, driven by a mixture of fear and determination to uncover the truth. After what felt like hours, I stumbled upon a clearing bathed in the silvery light of the moon. In the center stood a dilapidated cabin, its windows dark and foreboding. The snowman's footprints had led me here, and the air was thick with an unspoken tension. As I approached the cabin, the haunting melody grew louder, a lament that tugged at my soul. The door creaked open, revealing a scene that sent shivers down my spine. Inside, the remnants of a winter celebration lay scattered: a toppled chair, a broken ornament, and a lone candle flickering in the darkness. In the corner, I saw a smaller snowman, its coal eyes staring back at me with a familiar yet malevolent gaze. Before I could react, the air grew colder, and the candle's flame flickered wildly, casting dancing shadows across the room. A figure materialized before me, a woman dressed in old-fashioned winter attire, her face pale and sorrowful. Her eyes, deep and haunting, met mine, and I felt a surge of emotions: pain, loss, and an unending longing. "Why are you here?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the howling wind outside. She reached out a hand, her fingers trembling as they hovered near my face. "I cannot move on," she murmured, her voice echoing through the room. "You awakened me." Before I could respond, the room began to shift, the boundaries between reality and the supernatural blurring. The smaller snowman came to life, its coal eyes gleaming with an otherworldly light, and began to move towards me with an unrelenting purpose. Panic surged through me as I realized that the snowmen were more than just creations of snow. They were vessels for restless spirits, trapped between worlds, desperate to escape. I turned and ran towards the door, but the cabin seemed to transform, the door vanishing into thin air. The haunting melody grew louder, drowning out my cries for help, and the spirits of the snowmen closed in around me, their presence suffocating and overwhelming. Just as all hope seemed lost, a bright light pierced through the darkness, forcing me to shield my eyes. The spirits recoiled, their forms dissipating into the night air as the cabin began to crumble around me. I was thrown out of the clearing, the snowstorm breaking in force, the wind carrying away the remnants of the nightmare that had consumed me. Gasping for breath, I lay in the snow, the footprints now covered by fresh flakes that seemed to wash away the horrors of the night. As the storm subsided, I made my way back home, the memory of the living snowman etched into my mind forever. The snowman in my yard remained, its coal eyes watching over me with a silent warning, a reminder that some traditions come with a price. Years have passed since that harrowing night, but the experience remains a haunting chapter in my life. Every December, as the first snowflakes fall, I'm reminded of the thin veil that separates our world from the unknown, and the restless spirits that linger, waiting for their chance to be seen and heard. If you ever decide to build a snowman in the dead of winter, remember our story, respect the power of nature, honor the memories that may linger in the shadows, and be cautious of the traditions that might awaken forces beyond your control. For in the heart of the storm, not all snowmen are mere creations of ice and snow, and some spirits watch and wait, forever bound to the winter nights they once called home. Stay safe, cherish your loved ones, and may your winters be filled with warmth, love, and the enduring spirit of peace. Story number 2. Whispers in the Blizzard. I still remember that night with an unsettling clarity, as if the biting cold and swirling snow had etched every detail into my memory. Our family had moved to the remote village of Mirny, nestled deep within the vast expanses of Siberia, seeking a simpler life away from the relentless pace of the city. The village, though small and seemingly idyllic, held a sense of isolation that was both comforting and unnerving. It was mid-January, the heart of winter, when the storm hit with a ferocity that left little room for escape. The snow piled high against our modest wooden house, each flake adding to the thick blanket that transformed our surroundings into a monochromatic world of white. My wife, Anna, our 2 children, Mikhail and Katya, and I huddled together in the living room, the fireplace our only source of warmth against the relentless cold. The storm raged outside, the wind howling like a wounded beast, shaking the windows and causing the house to groan under nature's fury. We tried to keep our spirits up with stories and games, but the oppressive atmosphere weighed heavily on us. As midnight approached, the storm showed no signs of abating, and the darkness seemed to press in from all sides, making the house feel even more claustrophobic. Around 2 a.m., as the wind reached its peak and the snowstorm showed no mercy, a haunting melody pierced through the chaos outside. It was a soft, ethereal singing, delicate and sorrowful, carried on the howling wind. At first, we thought it was just the wind playing tricks on our ears, blending with the sounds of the storm, but as the singing grew louder and more distinct, it became impossible to ignore. "Do you hear that?" Anna whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and curiosity. I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. "It's beautiful, but also eerie." Katya, our 8-year-old daughter, clutched her blanket tightly, eyes wide with fear. "What is it, Papa?" "I don't know, sweetheart," I replied, trying to steady my voice. "But I think we should see where it's coming from." Anna glanced around the room, worry etched on her face. "Are you sure? It's so late, and the storm is terrible." "I have to check," I insisted, unable to shake the feeling that something was calling out to us from the depths of the blizzard. Grabbing a flashlight and my warmest coat, I made my way to the back door, Anna and the children following closely behind. The snow outside was a relentless wall, making it nearly impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. The singing seemed to emanate from the northern woods that bordered our property, a vast expanse of trees buried under thick layers of snow. "We need to be careful," Anna warned, her grip on Katya's hand tightening. "The storm is dangerous, and we don't know what's out there." I nodded, trying to reassure her as I opened the door. A gust of freezing wind hit me, nearly knocking me off balance. The singing grew louder, its melancholic tune cutting through the roar of the storm. Shining the flashlight towards the source, I could just make out the silhouettes of trees swaying violently in the wind, the snowflakes dancing around us like ghostly apparitions. "I think it's coming from that direction," I said, pointing towards the dense forest. "We should follow it." Anna hesitated, glancing back at our warm home. "Are you sure? It might be unsafe." But the singing was insistent, pulling me forward like a beacon in the darkness. "We won't go far," I promised, taking a step into the storm. The cold bit into my skin, and the wind whipped around us, making each step a struggle against nature's wrath. As we ventured deeper into the woods, the singing enveloped us, growing clearer and more enchanting. It was as if a spectral voice was guiding us, leading us towards something unseen. The footprints we left behind were quickly covered by the relentless snowfall, erasing any trace of our passage. After what felt like hours, we reached a small clearing illuminated by the pale light of the moon struggling through the storm. In the center stood an old, abandoned cabin, its wooden structure battered by years of neglect and the unforgiving Siberian winters. The singing seemed to emanate directly from within, drawing us closer despite the sense of unease settling in our hearts. "Should we go in?" Anna whispered, her eyes darting between me and the cabin. I took a deep breath, the cold air filling my lungs. "We have to. It's like the singing is calling out to us." We approached the cabin cautiously, the door creaking ominously as I pushed it open. The interior was dark and musty, the remnants of a bygone era scattered throughout the room, broken furniture, tattered curtains, and the faint scent of decay hanging in the air. The singing echoed through the empty space, guiding us towards the back of the cabin. In the corner of the room stood an old, dust-covered radio, its antenna barely visible beneath layers of grime. The radio crackled to life as we approached, the ghostly voice continuing its mournful tune. But there was something more, a voice overlaying the singing, soft and sorrowful, telling a tale of loss and longing. "Please, help me," the voice whispered, sending a shiver down my spine. "I can't move on." Anna clutched our children closer, her face pale. "What do we do?" I glanced around, searching for any clues. "We need to find out who she is and why she's here. Maybe we can help her find peace." As we explored the cabin, we found old photographs scattered across a dusty table, images of a woman and her children, smiling and happy, starkly contrasting the desolate state of the cabin now. One photograph, in particular, caught my eye, a family portrait taken just last Christmas. The year before we moved here, it was the same house, the same surroundings, but the faces in the picture were different, full of life and joy. "These must be hers," I murmured, showing the photo to Anna. "She lost her family here, didn't she?" Anna nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "We need to help her." Determined to bring peace to the restless spirit, we decided to perform a small ceremony, lighting candles and saying prayers for her and her children. As we finished, the singing began to change, shifting from sorrowful to hopeful, the melody becoming lighter and more serene. The air grew warmer, the oppressive tension lifting as if a weight had been lifted from the room. Suddenly, the radio fell silent, and a gentle breeze swept through the cabin, stirring the candles and carrying with it a sense of calm. We felt a presence beside us, a comforting warmth that reassured us we had done the right thing. The shadowy figure that had haunted our steps was now gone, replaced by a peaceful stillness that filled the space. As we left the cabin, the storm had subsided, the snow now falling gently, creating a serene blanket over the land. The footprints we had followed were now covered, erased by the tranquil snowfall, leaving no trace of the night's eerie events. Back at home, we huddled together, the memory of the night lingering but tempered by the sense of accomplishment and peace we had brought to the lost spirit. The singing had faded, replaced by the comforting sounds of a quiet winter night, and the oppressive fear that had gripped us had been replaced by a newfound sense of resilience and hope. Years have passed since that fateful night in Murney, but the memory remains, a haunting reminder of the thin veil that separates our world from the unknown, and the enduring power of compassion in the face of sorrow. Sometimes, when the wind howls just right and the snow begins to fall, I catch a glimpse of a shadow in the corner of my eye, a silent guardian watching over us, ensuring that the spirits of the past are never forgotten. If you ever find yourself alone in the dead of winter, listen to the whispers of the storm and heed the calls of those who cannot move on. Respect the memories that linger in forgotten corners. Honor the spirits that seek peace. And remember that even in the harshest of winters, there is warmth in compassion and light in understanding. Stay safe, cherish your loved ones, and may your winters be filled with warmth, love, and the enduring spirit of peace. Story number 3. Whispers in the Pines. I still remember the day I decided to stay at my family's cabin in the remote Alaskan forest. Life in the city had become unbearably hectic, and the constant noise left me yearning for silence and solitude. My parents owned the cabin, a rustic structure nestled deep within the towering pines. Far from the bustling streets and glaring lights, it was the perfect escape, or so I thought. The drive to the cabin was long and winding, the road disappearing into the dense forest as I navigated through miles of untouched snow. By the time I arrived, dusk had settled, casting an ethereal glow over the snow-covered landscape. The cabin stood resolute against the elements, smoke gently rising from the chimney, a beacon of warmth in the unforgiving wilderness. Inside, the cabin was as cozy as ever. The fireplace crackled merrily, its flames dancing and casting comforting shadows across the wooden walls. I unpacked my belongings, settling into the familiar surroundings that held memories of childhood winters spent with my parents and siblings. As night deepened, I found myself enveloped in a sense of peace, the kind that only nature's embrace can provide. Night 1. The unsettling chill. The first night passed uneventfully, the storm outside merely a distant rumble compared to the serenity within. I read by the fire, the flickering light creating a hypnotic rhythm that lulled me into a contented slumber. It wasn't until the early hours of the morning that I was awakened by an inexplicable sensation of cold. Shivering, I pulled the blanket tighter around me. Glancing around the room, the fireplace was burning brightly, its warmth seemingly unaffected by the chill that had settled into my bones. Confused, I rose from bed, the floorboards creaking under my weight. The temperature drop felt unnatural, as if the very air had turned against me. I reached for the thermostat, finding it set to a comfortable temperature. Yet the room remained unbearably cold. Wrapping a sweater around my shoulders, I returned to bed, trying to shake off the eerie feeling that had taken hold of me. Night 2, the mysterious knocking. The second night brought little respite. As I lay in bed, the silence was interrupted by a faint knocking sound emanating from the front door. My heart skipped a beat. Who could be visiting at this hour? I approached the window, peering out into the darkness, but saw nothing beyond the swirling snowflakes. Convinced it was merely the wind, I dismissed the sound and returned to bed. However, the knocking persisted, growing louder and more insistent as the night wore on. I couldn't ignore it any longer. Grabbing a flashlight and my sturdy winter coat, I made my way to the front door. The storm had intensified, the wind howling like a chorus of lost souls, making it nearly impossible to see anything beyond a few feet. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door, only to find the front porch empty. No footprints, no signs of an intruder, just the relentless storm and the stillness that followed the initial knocking. Confused and unnerved, I closed the door, trying to rationalize the occurrence. Perhaps a neighbor lost their way, or an animal had knocked something over. But the absence of any explanation left me with more questions than answers. As I retreated back inside, the temperature plummeted once more, the chill more intense than the night before. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, lurking just beyond the window, hidden within the shadows of the forest. Night 3, the silent shadow. By the third night, the cabin had transformed into a fortress against the elements, the walls closing in with the weight of unspoken fears. Exhausted from sleepless nights, I drifted into a restless sleep, my dreams plagued by images of the cabin engulfed in darkness, shadows stretching and twisting in unnatural ways. It was in the dead of night that I was jolted awake by a presence in the room. My eyes snapped open to see a dark figure standing silently in the corner, its form indistinct and blurred against the dim light. My heart raced, adrenaline surging through my veins as I sat up, staring at the apparition that seemed to embody my deepest fears. For a moment, there was nothing but the silent figure, its hollow eyes fixed on me with an intensity that sent chills down my spine. I reached for the flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness, but the figure remained unmoved, its presence unyielding and oppressive. Panic set in as I realized that whatever this entity was, it was bound to the cabin, unable to move on from its own unresolved torment. I tried to rationalize, telling myself it was a trick of the mind, a manifestation of the isolation and stress. But deep down, I knew something far more sinister was at play. The room felt colder now, the air thick with an unspoken sorrow that weighed heavily on my chest. I longed to flee, to escape the nightmare that had invaded my sanctuary, but my legs felt like lead, rooted to the spot by fear. As dawn approached, the figure began to fade, its form dissolving into the morning light that filtered through the windows. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, replaced by a fragile sense of calm. I lay back on the bed, trembling, knowing that the entity would return, bound by the very walls that had once been a haven, unraveling the past. Determined to uncover the truth behind the haunting, I delved into the history of the cabin. Conversations with neighbors and research into old records revealed a tragic story. Years ago, the cabin had been the home of a family who had perished in a brutal winter storm, their lives claimed by the unforgiving Alaskan wilderness. It was said that the father, driven to despair by the loss of his family, had never been able to let go, his spirit forever tethered to the cabin. The more I learned, the more I understood the presence that haunted me each night. It wasn't just a restless spirit. It was a manifestation of unending grief and loss, unable to find peace in death. The entity's silent observation was a desperate plea for acknowledgement, a yearning to be remembered and honored, a ritual for peace. Armed with this knowledge, I decided to perform a ritual to honor the lost family and help their spirits find peace. Gathering candles, flowers, and personal mementos, I set up a small shrine in the living room, a gesture of respect and remembrance. As I lit the candles and placed the items in a heartfelt arrangement, the temperature in the room began to rise, the oppressive cold giving way to a gentle warmth. I spoke softly, recounting the family's story and expressing my desire to help them find peace. The atmosphere shifted, the air growing lighter, the shadows retreating as if acknowledging the sincerity of my intentions. As I concluded the ritual, the fireplace crackled with renewed vigor, its flames dancing in harmony with the flickering candlelight. The aftermath. That night, the cabin felt different, calmer, more welcoming. I slept peacefully, the memory of the shadowy figure replaced by a sense of fulfillment and hope. The following morning, I awoke to find the cabin bathed in the soft glow of the rising sun, the air crisp and clear. There were no footprints in the snow, no signs of the entity that had once haunted my nights. The cabin stood as a beacon of peace amidst the vast, silent forest. Months have passed since that transformative winter, and the cabin remains a place of solace and reflection. The haunting presence has long since dissipated, replaced by the enduring warmth of the fireplace and the serene beauty of the Alaskan wilderness. Yet, the memory of those 3 harrowing nights serves as a poignant reminder of the thin veil that separates our world from the unknown, and the power of compassion in bringing peace to restless spirits. Sometimes, when the wind whispers through the pines and the snow begins to fall, I catch a glimpse of movement in the corner of my eye, a fleeting shadow that dances just beyond the reach of the firelight. It's a silent reminder that some stories never truly end, and some spirits linger, waiting for someone to hear their whispers and help them find their way home. If you ever find yourself seeking solitude in the heart of a winter storm, remember our story. Respect the memories that dwell in forgotten places. Honor the spirits that seek peace, and listen to the whispers carried by the wind. For in the stillness of the snow-covered forest, not all shadows are meant to fade, and some echoes of the past are waiting to be heard by those who dare to listen. Stay safe, cherish your loved ones, and may your winters be filled with warmth, love, and the enduring spirit of peace. Story number 4. Shadow on the snow. I still remember that night as if it were yesterday. The way the snowflakes danced in the headlights and the eerie silence of the mountain road that stretched endlessly before me. My name is Alex Turner, and I've been a truck driver for over a decade, hauling goods across some of the most remote and treacherous roads in America. But nothing in my years behind the wheel had prepared me for what I experienced that cold December night in the Alaskan wilderness. It was late December, and the winter storm had rolled in faster than expected. I was hauling supplies to a remote logging camp nestled deep within the Tongass National Forest. The forecast had predicted heavy snowfall, but nothing had warned me about the intensity of the storm that awaited me. My rig, a sturdy 18-wheeler named Betsy, was equipped for harsh conditions, but as the wind howled and the snow piled higher, I knew I was in for a challenging night. By midnight, visibility had dropped to near zero. The thick blanket of snow reduced the world outside to a monochromatic blur of white and gray. I relied on the truck's powerful headlights to guide me. But even they struggled against the relentless snowfall. My hands were numb, my fingers stiff around the steering wheel. Yet I pushed forward, determined to reach my destination before the storm worsened. Around 2 a.m., as I navigated a particularly treacherous stretch of mountain road, something caught my eye, a shadowy figure standing in the middle of the road, just a few meters ahead of Betsy. My heart skipped a beat. Was it a stranded motorist? An animal caught in the storm? My mind raced with possibilities, but instinct told me to stop and check. I slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding slightly on the slick pavement before coming to a halt. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the relentless wind outside. I reached for the radio, hoping to hail assistance, but all I got was static. Gathering my courage, I grabbed a flashlight and stepped out into the storm, the cold biting through my layers of clothing. The snow swirled around me, obscuring my vision as I approached the figure. As I drew closer, the shape became clearer, a man, or what appeared to be a man, standing motionless in the snow. His coat was tattered, and his breath was visible in the frigid air. I called out, "Hey, are you okay? Do you need help?" There was no response. I looked around, my heart pounding in my chest, but there was no one else in sight. The figure remained still, his eyes hidden beneath the hood of his coat. I reached out to touch his shoulder, but as my hand made contact with his back, he vanished into thin air, leaving nothing but a faint outline where he had stood moments before. Confused and unnerved, I turned to head back to the truck. That's when I noticed it. A faint handprint smeared across the windshield of Betsy, as if someone had pressed their palm against it and then pulled away. My blood ran cold. There was no sign of anyone, no footprints in the fresh snow, just the mysterious handprint lingering on the glass. I stood there for a moment, staring at the handprint, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. Had I imagined the entire encounter? The storm had taken its toll on my senses, making me question reality itself. I decided to head back inside, hoping to shake off the lingering fear. Inside the truck, I wiped the handprint off the windshield, but the image seemed to resist my efforts, the darkness of the glass absorbing the faint marks as if they were never there. Shaking my head, I tried to focus on getting back on the road, but an overwhelming sense of dread settled over me. The storm showed no signs of letting up, and the road ahead remained obscured by the relentless snowfall. As I drove, my mind replayed the events of earlier, each repetition heightening my anxiety. The idea of a lone figure in the storm, the unexplained disappearance, and the mysterious handprint created a narrative in my head that was both terrifying and inexplicable. I couldn't help but feel that I wasn't alone, that something or someone was watching me from the shadows of the storm. Hours passed as I navigated the treacherous roads, the storm gradually losing its ferocity but leaving behind a serene, if unnerving, stillness, just as dawn began to break, painting the sky with hues of pink and orange. I spotted the logging camp in the distance. Relief washed over me as I realized I had made it through the night unscathed. Almost. But as I approached the entrance, another chill ran down my spine. There, standing beside the entrance sign, was the same figure I had encountered hours earlier. This time, his presence was more defined, his eyes glaring at me with an intensity that pierced through the morning light. My blood ran cold once more. I slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding to a stop just meters away from him. Frozen in fear, I watched as the figure began to move towards me, his steps slow and deliberate. "What do you want?" I managed to choke out, my voice barely a whisper over the hum of the engine. He stopped just short of the truck, his eyes never leaving mine. "You saw me," he said, his voice a haunting echo that seemed to resonate from the depths of the forest itself. I swallowed hard, unable to find my voice. "I didn't mean to." He raised a hand, pointing towards the heart of the forest. "Some things are not meant to be disturbed," he intoned, his gaze unwavering. Before I could respond, He turned and began to walk away, his figure blending seamlessly into the surrounding trees. I watched him disappear into the forest, the morning light gradually erasing his presence until he was nothing more than a shadow among the pines. Shaken to my core, I sat back in the truck, the weight of his words pressing down on me. I started the engine, the hum of the truck providing a semblance of normalcy. But my mind was anything but calm. The handprint on the windshield, the shadowy figure in the storm, and his cryptic message left me with more questions than answers. Over the following days, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I drove through that stretch of mountain road, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the man staring back at me with his hollow eyes. My sleep was plagued with nightmares of the storm, the shadowy figure, and the icy grip of fear that had taken hold of me that night. Determined to find some explanation, I delved into the local archives, researching the history of the road and the surrounding area. What I discovered was a story steeped in tragedy and mystery. Decades ago, a family had been traveling through the same mountain pass during a severe storm. Their truck had skidded off the road, and they had never been found. Some say their spirits lingered in the area, bound by the unresolved tragedy that had claimed their lives. The man I had encountered was likely one of the lost souls, forever trapped in the storm's embrace. His presence a warning to those who dared to traverse the treacherous roads alone. The handprint on my windshield was his way of marking me, a reminder that some places hold secrets too dark to uncover. Armed with this knowledge, I took steps to honor their memory and offer them the peace they sought. I reached out to local authorities and historical societies, sharing my experience in hopes of bringing attention to the haunted stretch of road. Together, we organized memorials and placed signs along the road, warning travelers of the ghostly presence that roamed the mountains during winter storms. Months passed, and while the fear never fully left me, there was a sense of closure that eased the lingering dread. I continued my job as a truck driver, always mindful of the stories I had uncovered and the spirits that watched over the roads I traveled. But every now and then, during a particularly fierce storm, I'd catch a glimpse of a shadowy figure in my rearview mirror, standing just a few meters ahead. His coal-black eyes seemed to follow me, a silent sentinel reminding me of the thin veil that separates our world from the unknown. In those moments, I'm reminded to respect the restless spirits that linger in forgotten places and to never underestimate the power of the mountains that stand watch over us. If you ever find yourself driving through the remote stretches of Alaska during a winter storm, remember my story. Respect the solitude of the wilderness. Heed the warnings etched into the very fabric of the roads. And be aware that not all shadows are just tricks of the light. Some are echoes of the past, forever watching, forever waiting. Stay safe out there. Cherish your loved ones. And may your journeys be free of shadows and haunted only by the peaceful memories of those who have found their way home. Story number 5. The haunting under the streetlight. I still remember that frigid December night with the vividness of a haunting dream. The wind howled through the barren trees, and the snow piled high along the deserted country road we were traveling. My partner, Laura, and I had decided to take a shortcut through the Old Miller's Road, a path that locals avoided after dark due to its eerie reputation. But desperate to reach home after a long day, we dismissed the warnings, telling ourselves that superstitions were just stories to scare children. Our truck's heater struggled against the biting cold. The windshield frosted over despite the defrost settings. As we drove deeper into the wilderness, the landscape transformed into a monochrome world of white and gray, the trees mere shadows against the heavy snowfall. The road was slick, the tires gripping the ice-covered pavement with difficulty. The radio was off, and the only sounds were the crunching of snow beneath the tires and the distant howl of the wind. Around midnight, just as exhaustion began to take its toll, we spotted a solitary figure standing beneath a flickering street lamp. A woman in a flowing white dress, her head bowed, seemed to be waiting for something or someone. My heart skipped a beat. "Laura, look," I whispered, pointing towards the figure. She glanced over, her breath visible in the cold air, and nodded silently. Instinctively, we slowed the truck, pulling over to offer help. The woman remained motionless, her presence both serene and unsettling under the dim light. I reached out the window, calling out, "Are you okay? Do you need help?" Her response was only a faint, sorrowful hum carried away by the wind. Determined to assist, I grabbed a flashlight from the glove compartment and stepped out into the storm. Laura followed, clutching her coat tighter against the chill. The snow was coming down harder now, the flakes stinging our faces as we approached her. Each step towards the woman felt like wading through a thick fog of unease. As we drew closer, she lifted her head, revealing a face that sent shivers down my spine. Her eyes were hollow, dark pools of emptiness that seemed to stare into my very soul. Blood stained her cheeks and the collar of her dress, the crimson contrasting sharply against her pale skin. My mind screamed to turn back, to retreat into the safety of the truck. But my feet moved of their own accord, compelled by a mix of fear and compassion. "Are you all right?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. Her lips moved, but no sound emerged. Instead, a cold, otherworldly presence filled the air, and before I could react, she vanished into thin air, leaving nothing but the lingering chill and the faint scent of decay. Stunned, I stood there for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. Laura reached out, taking my hand in hers, her grip trembling. "We need to go," she urged, her voice shaking with fear. I nodded, backing away from the spot where she had stood, the flashlight's beam flickering unervingly in the swirling snow. We hurried back to the truck, the sense of being watched heavy in the air. As I slid into the driver's seat, I glanced at the windshield, expecting to see her again. Instead, I saw a faint, ghostly handprint smeared across the glass, as if someone or something had pressed their hand against it before disappearing. "Did you see that?" Laura asked, her eyes wide with terror. I nodded, my mind racing with questions and fear. What the hell was that? Before we could gather our thoughts, the engine sputtered and died, the truck refusing to start despite my frantic attempts to get it running. The snowstorm intensified, the wind howling louder, as if mocking our helplessness. Panic set in as I realized we were stranded. The only light coming from the flickering street lamp and the distant glow of other houses that seemed to fade into the storm. As the hours dragged on, the storm showed no signs of relenting. Laura and I huddled together, trying to keep warm and calm. But the fear of the unknown presence lingering outside gnawed at us. Every creak of the truck and every gust of wind felt like a threat, a reminder that we were not alone. By dawn, the storm had finally begun to abate, the snow slowing to a gentle fall. The first rays of sunlight pierced through the clouds, illuminating the road ahead. I managed to start the truck, the engine roaring to life, and we prepared to continue our journey home. But as we pulled back onto the road, a lingering sense of dread remained, the memory of the woman in white etched into our minds. We reached the nearest town hours later, the relief of civilization washing over us. As we recounted our experience to the local sheriff, he listened with a mixture of skepticism and concern. "You're not the first to see her," he said thoughtfully. "They say the Miller's Road is haunted by the spirit of a woman who lost her life in a tragic accident during a snowstorm years ago. Locals believe her spirit lingers, forever searching for help she never received." The sheriff's words only deepened the mystery, but it provided a semblance of explanation for the terrifying encounter. Determined to understand, we decided to research the history of Miller's Road, delving into old records and speaking with longtime residents. What we uncovered was a tragic tale of love and loss, of a woman who had waited for her lover who never returned, her grief consuming her until she became a ghostly presence, eternally trapped in a moment of desperation. The more we learned, the more we realized that our encounter was not just a random haunting but a manifestation of unresolved sorrow and longing. The handprint on the windshield was her way of marking us, a reminder of her eternal search for someone to help her move on. Determined to offer peace to her restless spirit, we returned to the site a week later, armed with candles, flowers, and a sense of purpose. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the snow-covered road, we set up a small memorial, lighting candles and laying down flowers in her honor. We spoke words of compassion, acknowledging her pain and offering our help to guide her spirit to rest. As night fell, the air grew still, the storm having passed entirely. We waited in silence, the flickering candlelight creating a serene glow in the darkness. Hours passed without incident, the fear giving way to a sense of hope and fulfillment. As we prepared to leave, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it a faint melody of sorrow and peace. It was as if the spirit had acknowledged our gesture, her presence now transformed from one of fear to one of gratitude. Driving home that night, the road seemed less foreboding, the shadows less menacing. The memory of the woman in white lingered, but it was now tinged with a sense of closure and empathy. We knew that some spirits linger not out of malice but out of unending pain, and that sometimes, all they need is a little understanding to finally find peace. Years have passed since that harrowing December night, but the story of the woman in white on Miller's Road remains a chilling reminder of the thin veil that separates our world from the unknown. Sometimes, when the winter winds howl just right and the snow begins to fall, I catch a glimpse of a shadowy figure standing beneath a flickering street lamp, her presence a silent testament to the enduring power of love and loss. If you ever find yourself driving down a deserted road on a cold winter night, remember our story. Respect the boundaries of the unknown. Honor the memories that linger in forgotten places, and listen to the whispers carried by the wind. For in the heart of the storm, not all shadows are mere tricks of the light, and some spirits wait patiently, searching for someone to help them find their way home. Stay safe, cherish your loved ones, and may your winters be filled with warmth, love, and the enduring spirit of peace. Story number 6. The Face in the Snow. I still remember the biting cold that crept through the dense forest that winter. The way the trees loomed like silent sentinels over our group as we trudged through knee-deep snow. We were 4 friends, Jake, Sophie, Miranda, and me on what was supposed to be an adventurous winter hike through the secluded pinewood forest. What started as a spontaneous escape from the mundane turned into a nightmare we could never have anticipated. The forest was beautiful in its desolation, blanketed in a pristine layer of snow that muffled every sound and seemed to swallow the world whole. By late afternoon, the sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving us shrouded in the eerie twilight of a gray winter evening. The temperature plummeted, and our enthusiasm began to wane as we realized we had wandered off the marked trail. "We need to find shelter," Jake said, his breath visible in the freezing air. "It's too cold to camp out here." "Shelter? Out here?" Miranda scoffed, wrapping her arms around herself. "The only thing out here is more trees." "Maybe not," Sophie interjected, pointing ahead. "Look!" Through the thickening snowfall, a small cabin emerged, its silhouette dark and unwelcoming against the white expanse. It looked old, the wooden structure leaning slightly to one side, as if the weight of the snow on its roof was too much to bear. The windows were frosted over, and the door hung slightly ajar, revealing nothing but darkness inside. "Do you think it's safe?" I asked, hesitating as the rest of the group moved closer. "Safer than freezing out here," Jake replied, already pulling the door open, creaked loudly, the sound echoing through the stillness of the forest, and I felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. Inside, the cabin was sparse but intact. A dusty table sat in the center of the single room, surrounded by 4 mismatched chairs. An old stone fireplace took up one wall, its hearth filled with charred wood that suggested someone had once sought refuge here, though it had clearly been years, if not decades, since anyone had used it. "This'll do," Jake said, dropping his pack onto the floor. "We can make a fire and get some rest." As we settled in, The tension began to ease. Jake managed to light a fire in the hearth, filling the room with a flickering warmth that contrasted sharply with the chill outside. We shared snacks from our packs and talked about our plans for the morning, laughing at our misadventure as the storm raged on outside. But as the hours stretched on, an uneasy feeling settled over me. The flickering shadows cast by the fire seemed to dance unnaturally, and the howling wind outside sounded almost like whispers. I tried to shake off the creeping dread, telling myself it was just my imagination, heightened by the isolation and the storm. It was Sophie who first noticed it. She had been sitting by the window, gazing out into the darkness, when she suddenly stiffened. "What is it?" I asked, my voice low. She turned to us, her face pale. "I thought I saw someone outside." Jake snorted. "It's the middle of nowhere, Sophie. There's no one out there." "No," she insisted, her voice trembling. "There was a face, right there." She pointed to the frosted window. We all turned to look. The window was fogged over with frost, but as the firelight danced across the glass, we saw it, a faint impression of a face, pressed against the outside of the window. The outline was unmistakable: hollow eyes, a flat nose, and a slightly open mouth, as if someone had been staring in at us. "What the hell?" Miranda whispered, backing away. Jake moved closer, wiping at the inside of the glass with his sleeve. The frost on our side cleared, but the face remained, etched into the outside layer of snow and frost. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end as I realized what was so wrong about the scene. The snow outside was untouched. No footprints. No signs that anyone had been near the window. "That's not possible," I murmured, my breath fogging the glass. How could someone leave a face print without disturbing the snow? Jake didn't answer. He just stared at the window, his jaw clenched, before finally turning away. "It's nothing, just a trick of the light." But none of us believed that. The mood in the cabin shifted. The warmth of the fire no longer felt comforting, and the shadows seemed to grow darker, deeper. Sophie moved away from the window, sitting close to the fire with her knees drawn to her chest. The hours dragged by in oppressive silence. No one dared to voice what we were all thinking, that we were not alone. Every creak of the cabin, every gust of wind against the walls, felt like an ominous warning. Around midnight, the fire began to die down, and with it, the thin veneer of safety it provided. Jake got up to add more wood but froze halfway to the fireplace, his eyes fixed on the door. It was ajar again, though none of us had touched it. Did anyone open the door?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "No," Miranda replied, her voice shaking. "We shut it. I know we shut it." Before anyone could respond, the door creaked open wider, revealing the swirling snowstorm outside. A shadow moved just beyond the threshold, too quick to identify but unmistakably there. Jake slammed the door shut, bolting it with trembling hands. "We're leaving at first light," he said, his tone brooking no argument. None of us slept that night. We huddled together near the fire, the unease growing with every passing minute. The face on the window disappeared, only to reappear on another pane, and then another, as if circling the cabin. The whispers in the wind grew louder, almost forming words we couldn't quite understand. When dawn finally broke, the storm had subsided, leaving the forest eerily quiet. We gathered our things and stepped outside, eager to leave the cabin behind. But as we moved away from the structure, I couldn't resist looking back. The face was there again, pressed against the window, watching us leave. We didn't speak of what happened during the hike back to civilization. The silence between us was heavy with unspoken fear, and when we finally parted ways, none of us suggested meeting up again. The cabin had taken something from us, something we couldn't quite name. Months later, I found myself researching the area, desperate for answers. I learned that the cabin had belonged to a reclusive man who had vanished decades ago during a winter storm. Locals claimed his spirit still lingered, trapped by his own isolation and despair. watching anyone who dared to enter his domain. I never returned to Pinewood Forest, but sometimes, on cold winter nights, I dream of the cabin. In those dreams, the face appears again, pressed against the window, his hollow eyes staring directly at me. I wake up drenched in sweat, the memory of that haunting winter as vivid as the day it happened. If you ever find yourself hiking through a snow-covered forest and stumble upon an abandoned cabin, heed my warning, don't go inside. Some places are meant to be left alone, their secrets buried beneath the snow and ice. Because once you step through the threshold, you may find yourself being watched, and you might not be able to leave. Stay safe, cherish your warmth, and never forget, the cold isn't the only thing that can haunt you in the wilderness. Story number 7. The Man on the Park Bench. It was a night like no other, cold and biting, with the kind of chill that creeps into your bones and refuses to leave. The snow had stopped falling hours ago, but the park was still blanketed in a thick layer of white, muffling every sound and transforming the familiar paths into a silent, dreamlike expanse. I'd been restless all evening, so I decided to take a walk through Glenwood Park, a place I knew well and often turned to when my thoughts became too loud. The park had always been a refuge for me. Its winding trails and old oak trees offered a quiet escape from the chaos of the city. But that night, as I passed through the rusted iron gates, I felt an unshakable sense of unease. The stillness wasn't comforting. It was oppressive, as though the park itself was holding its breath. I pulled my coat tighter around me, my boots crunching softly against the packed snow as I wandered deeper into the park. The streetlights cast long shadows across the ground, their orange glow creating pools of light that seemed to hover precariously between the darkened stretches of path. It was in one of those illuminated spots that I first saw him. The man was sitting on a bench just ahead, his figure slouched and still. He was dressed in an old, tattered coat, his hands resting on his knees. Even from a distance, I could see the deep creases on his face, etched like scars from a lifetime of hardships. His head was bowed slightly, as though lost in thought or prayer. I hesitated, unsure of what to do. It was nearly midnight, and the park was deserted, at least I thought it was. The sight of another person should have been comforting. But something about the man felt off. He didn't move, didn't shiver despite the freezing temperature. He was as still as a statue. "Excuse me, sir," I called out, my voice sounding small and unsure in the vast emptiness. He didn't respond. I stepped closer, feeling a strange compulsion to check on him. "Are you all right? Do you need help?" Still nothing. The only sound was the faint whistle of the wind through the bare trees. As I approached, I noticed his face more clearly. His skin was pale, almost gray, and his eyes dark, hollow, and unblinking were fixed on me. It was a look that seemed to pierce through me, as though he wasn't just looking at me but into me. "Sir," I tried again, my breath visible in the frigid air. He didn't move, didn't blink. My pulse quickened, and a cold sweat formed on the back of my neck despite the freezing temperature. The longer I stood there, the more oppressive his gaze became, until it felt like the weight of his stare alone might crush me. Something inside me snapped. Without thinking, I turned and ran, my boots slipping on the icy path as I fled back towards the entrance of the park. I didn't dare look back. My heart pounded in my chest, and my breath came in ragged gasps as I pushed myself to keep going, fueled by a primal fear I couldn't explain. I didn't stop running until I was back in the safety of my apartment. Slamming the door behind me, I leaned against it, my chest heaving as I tried to catch my breath. The image of the man's face was burned into my mind, his lifeless eyes haunting me even in the brightly lit warmth of my living room. The next morning, I told my friends about the encounter. They listened with a mixture of curiosity and concern, their skepticism clear. "There's no way you saw someone in Glenwood Park last night," one of them said, shaking his head. "That place has been closed for weeks." "What are you talking about?" I asked, confused. "I was just there." "You didn't hear?" another friend chimed in. There was a murder there a month ago. Some old man was found on a bench, stabbed to death. They say the park's been locked up ever since. My blood ran cold. That's not possible, I stammered. I was there. I saw him. They exchanged uneasy glances, their doubt only deepening the pit of dread forming in my stomach. Desperate for answers, I decided to do some digging. A quick search online confirmed what they had told me. A man in his 60s, homeless and alone, had been killed in Glenwood Park. The details were sparse, but the description of the crime scene was chillingly familiar. He had been found sitting on a bench, his body frozen in the exact posture of the man I had seen. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I hadn't just seen a man in the park that night. I had seen him, or at least, what was left of him. I spent the rest of the day in a haze, my thoughts racing as I tried to make sense of what had happened. Was it a ghost? A hallucination brought on by the cold and my own imagination? The logical part of me clung to the latter. But deep down, I knew the truth. The man on the bench wasn't just a figment of my mind. He was real, and he was trying to reach me. That night, couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, his hollow stare, his lifeless expression. Around midnight, I heard it, the faint sound of footsteps outside my apartment. My heart raced as I crept to the window and peeked through the blinds. There, under the dim glow of the street lamp, stood the man from the park. He was looking up at my window, his eyes locked onto mine. I froze, unable to move, unable to breathe. The moment stretched on for what felt like an eternity before he turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows. I never saw him again after that night, but his presence has stayed with me. I don't walk through parks after dark anymore, and I avoid Glenwood Park entirely. The memory of that winter night is a scar I carry, a reminder that some things in this world can't be explained. If you ever find yourself walking alone at night and see someone sitting on a bench, be careful. Not all who sit and stare are truly alive. And if they look at you with hollow eyes, run. Don't stop. Don't look back. Some spirits are not meant to be disturbed. And once they see you, they might never let you go. Stay safe. Cherish the light. And never forget, the shadows in the night are not always empty.